and maintenance of the standard, and we're lucky enough to have close connections with the RSC through former chair and current technical team liaison officer Gordon Dunsire. Gordon is going to start us off this morning by giving us a report on the latest news from the RSC. So I'll stop sharing my screen and Gordon will start to share his.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. I won't introduce myself since I just had an excellent introduction. This presentation is going to be a rapid walk through some of the features that are going to be included in the forthcoming release, the beta release of the new RDA toolkit, which is imminent. This is going to be quite speedy. You may not have time to read the contents of the screenshots. This is really just to orientate you to the new features. You'll be able to look at this presentation later. The slides will also be separately available. And of course, if you subscribe to the toolkit, you'll be able to see all of this in situ when the new release is published. So this is based on screenshots that I took from our development site. The next release is due in September, which is this month. It's scheduled for release next week. And I've put a warning up here that anything can happen in the next 24 hours. So please don't get back to me saying that the screenshots don't match reality. I think it's highly unlikely that things will change, but you never know. And that was an in-joke for serials catalogers. So I'm going to cover two new guidance chapters on entity boundaries and well-formed RDA. A new set of mappings to the EFLA library reference model, a huge new section on community resources, which is still in development, which supports internationalization, and information on policy statements and translations. Please bear this, this one-sentence description of RDA in mind. It is what is driving the development of the new toolkit. So we have, after discussion at the last RDA steering committee meeting, which we're conducting asynchronously, the RSC approved a proposal to add specific guidance on entity boundaries to the toolkit. We define an entity boundary as a set of criteria that you apply as a cataloger to determine if a description of a new RDA entity is required. In fact, there are two kinds of entity boundary. What we might describe as an absolute entity boundary is determined by the physical reality of the world in which we live. Persons, for example, have absolute boundaries because you can't be two different people. Works, on the other hand, notoriously have boundaries that are entirely localized to cultural and conventional norms. So guidance is really required. There was latent guidance in the new toolkit, but we've gathered it all together and made it more consistent and comprehensive. So as well as a general guidance chapter on boundaries, we have a set of specific instructions for each of the RDA entities. This is an extract from the person entity instructions. It has an absolute boundary, and there are 4 RDA elements that can be used to determine if that boundary has been crossed. For example, 2 persons with distinctly different dates of birth are likely to be 2 individual persons and not 1 person using a pseudonym. These are not the only conditions, however. These are the absolute boundary conditions for a person. And we may add other physical attributes of a person to this in due course. The instruction to create a new instance is not optional. You must create a new instance for your metadata to remain well-formed and coherent. But there are also relative boundary conditions governed by cultural conventions, etc. And that includes local application profiles and policy statements. So, for example, a change in the value of field of activity of a person is a strong indicator that you may be dealing with two different people. We've seen some of this discussed in presentations earlier this week. The second new guidance chapter is on Wellformed RDA. As the new toolkit reaches its final stage of publication, communities are beginning to say, well, what does it take for us to say that we have an RDA record, etc. And so in order to clarify this, we have added a guidance chapter on how well-formed RDA is defined, what criteria must be met before you can claim that it's well-formed, and how this ties in with the objectives and principles of RDA itself. So this is an extract from that new guidance chapter. It also includes information for developers and technical people on how you measure conformance of RDA metadata. The RSC is still discussing the possibilities of some kind of self-certification approach to this, a bit like adding a Creative Commons copyright statement to your website. The next thing I want to talk about is a new set of mappings to the EFLA library reference model. These appear in the element reference section of all of the elements. We've done about 80% so far for the next release, so one or two of the elements don't have a mapping at the moment. But in the element reference section, when you expand it, you will now find a mapping to the EFLA LRM as well as Dublin Core and Mark 21. This has come about because EFLA has just published the library reference model as linked data in the EFLA namespace. And this is now an active link. We've made this active so that you can click on this URL, URI, and see the EFLA definitions. This is an important part of providing contextual information for the new toolkit. This was one of the big issues that were identified early on in the redesign and restructure project. The next very big area of development is in what we're calling community resources. We have revised the resources main menu tab. This is a much slimmed down version that you will see in the next version of the toolkit. And we've moved a lot of localization information from the original toolkit into this area, which is intended for maintenance by the communities to whom it matters, rather than the RSC primarily. But we're still working out the governance infrastructure for this in order to effect this change to allow stability of the toolkit when it's published at the end of the year. We've made this change to the menu, the main menu, with this next release. Currently, there's only one section within community resources, it's community vocabularies. And this is a grab bag of bits and pieces left over from the original toolkit, various vocabulary encoding schemes that were only used locally, for example, gender, or were controversial, or required maintenance, or incomplete. So these vocabularies are pertinent to toolkit user communities, but they're not maintained as part of the basic RDA. What we've done is organized all of this information by language. The original toolkit has this information scattered throughout, and there is an inherent focus in the toolkit on English and Anglo-American cataloging tradition. as the base, and everything else is an extension or alternative. That has been changed as a result of RDA board strategy and the desire of the RDA steering committee. So we now have this information organized by language. There are over 60 languages present, which was a surprise to everybody. The stuff was scattered in the original toolkit. And I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that English is now treated like every other language for these purposes. So terms in English includes capitalization rules for English national holidays, etc. These are of interest to people who are cataloging English-based publications in the same way that Anglophones are interested in getting some information about Dutch, Danish, Czech, etc. This is now under international construction, however, by the communities themselves. We're still working on this. When you see the new toolkit issue next week, you'll find that below that neat menu, there's a fair amount of chaos. We're still working on it, and it's on track to be completed before the end of the 3R project in December. We're thinking of internal tables of contents like this, which mirror the layout of the appendices in the original toolkit. So a section on capitalization, initial articles, terms of rank, to which we will add livre de Bible, which is the French terms for the books of the Bible, etc. Another language-based and internationalization development, which is appearing in this, the beta toolkit for the first time, is the ability to turn on translations. Translations come in two sections within the toolkit. There is the site language, which is the menus, all of the menu items that you see. I'll show you a screenshot in a minute. You can turn that on in a local language, but leave a different language for the instructions themselves, or vice versa, or both. This is to allow considerable flexibility for translators. Some language communities like the idea of a site language because they're working in a familiar environment, but everybody speaks English and there's no need for a full translation of the toolkit itself. So this is truly internationalization in action. The languages are self-chosen, and that's why Finnish and Norwegian are the two that will be in the next toolkit. We have a longer list of languages in preparation, including major European languages, French, German, Spanish, Italian, and indeed some others. So if I turn on the Finnish, everything switches to Finnish. So I guess this could be used for those of you still in lockdown. If you're learning Finnish as a language, then here's another tool for you to help. So that's all finished to me, and we'll switch back to English. The other new feature appearing in the next toolkit is the appearance of the policy statements. Alan's going to talk a lot more about this from the British Library point of view in the next presentation. And I've chosen, therefore, to show you what the Library of Congress Programme for Cataloguing is doing. So in this feature, which you can turn on or off, the policy statements of a single agency will appear in line with the various options available in the new toolkit. There's also a separate approach, which is to start with the policy statements and then connect to the specific instructions and options which are associated with that statement. And LC has chosen to try and add a policy statement to every option. so that cataloguers are not puzzled and not wondering whether there is no policy or it's just been inadvertently missed from the toolkit. So this is just a very quick preview of how policy statements will appear. At the moment, it's still being worked on, and details are being worked out by the policy statement agencies. As they see this appear in the toolkit, we expect them to refine the language and layout of policy statements to better fit use of the toolkit in due course. That's really it. It's been a whirlwind take through some of the features. In addition to what I've shown you, as usual with the 3R project, we've had the opportunity from feedback from the beta toolkit. And I must stress this, we pay attention to every piece of feedback we get. There is a feedback form available for you to fill in. We do not respond to individual requests, but we do try and fix things where there are real issues being raised. This includes typographic errors and all sorts of artifacts that appear from such a large project. We are still in beta. I encourage you to use that feedback. We are correcting and improving errors all the time. We only have another 3 months to go. We are on schedule to publish the new toolkit as the official toolkit in mid-December. And from 2021, the new toolkit will be what you see at the URL for RDA Toolkit. And the original toolkit will still be made available. Do not panic. Where the current toolkit will remain available until such time as the RDA board agrees that policy statements, translations, and training materials sufficient to switch people over to the new toolkit completely are in place. This is expected to take at least 1 year. And that's it. And I've deliberately rushed through this. I know that Alan would appreciate more time for his presentations and the demonstration, which will be much more relevant to cataloging in RDA in the United Kingdom. We'll take questions and answers at the end of the session, so please take the availability of me being here to ask any questions about the new RDA toolkit via the chat channel. Thank you. Further information is available from the usual sources.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gordon.